Well, good morning there, guys. This is Bob Lollard from the Cornish Crusade, back again with another video, just going through some of the random models that I've painted and built over the last 2 years since I've been away. And these ones are a really mixed bag. These ones are a mixed bag of heroes and monsters from a variety of sources, manufacturers, and retailers. And these are for the purposes mostly of playing role-playing games. And as you can see, what's all set up, if any of you haven't heard of Castles and Crusades, it's created by a bunch of people who were, I think, involved in Dungeons and Dragons in the early days, who didn't like the way that things went after, I think it was fourth edition, possibly third, and decided to strike out and do their own thing. So it's a D20 system, much like Dungeons and Dragons. And some people have said, when trying to explain what Castles and Crusades plays like, is that it plays a lot like Dungeons and Dragons third edition, but it feels a lot like those old school advanced Dungeons and Dragons games. So a modern way of playing, but an old school feeling as you play. And here are the assembled masses. And like I say, I've broken them up into distinct groups so you can get a better view of them. And we're going to bust out my turntable, and we will show you these models all individually. So if you just hang fire there, we will be right back with our first group. So the first group here is the Clergy. Now, there are 6 characters in this little assembly here. There are 3 nuns and 3 priests. The nuns are simple enough. They are all Frostgrave wizards or apprentices, painted up as an abbess, a novice, and as a wandering hedge nun, as I'm calling her. So they will be, they're all nuns, perhaps serving all together in a convent somewhere. Now, the 3 priests are far more complicated. They are kit bashes from a variety of sources to create a real post-apocalyptic nuclear brotherhood kind of feel. If you've ever read A Canticle for Leibowitz, or you've ever enjoyed Warhammer 40,000's The Adeptus Mechanicus, or whatever the name of that atomic brotherhood is in the Battletech universe, the phone company, basically, it's BT in space. That's the sort of idea that we're looking at here. So these are a priesthood, possibly a Christian priesthood, but transplanted 10,000 years into the future, or perhaps even more, with all of these new agglomerated traditions and such like, which I like to think is represented by the fact that although they look fairly medieval, they've all got big astronaut helmets on, and they're all carrying Bergen backpacks. So the first is the Red Priest, who I imagine to be a classic Dungeons and Dragons style cleric, or a cleric class in Castles and Crusades. He's made from the Frostgrave plastic wizard set with the astronaut helm and Bergen backpack from Anvil Industries. He has a little bronze wreath atop his helmet there, which I believe came from a Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine set. The second is the Yellow Priest, who's more of a wizard and who I imagine to be the leader of the merry band. Again, he is primarily from the Frostgrave wizard sprue with the Anvil astronaut helmet and Bergen backpack. As you can see from the Red Cleric and the Yellow Priest as well, attached to their belts, they have various accoutrements which came from the Games Workshop old Warhammer Fantasy Battles Bretonnian Archer range. And then lastly, we have the Blue Priest, who's definitely more of a cleric or paladin type, there with his mace and shield. So he also has the Frostgrave wizard body from their plastic kit, and an Anvil Industries helm and Bergen backpack, but his arms and mace come from the Fireforge Games medieval Russian kit, and his shield is from a sprue of Peri-Sudanese tribesmen, of all places. So he's a real diverse character with pieces from about 4 different kits. Now, all of them I have based on 32mm bases, just to give them that heroic posture and make them stand out from any other miniatures that they might be facing. So the next group is from the country of Gapsmark. You'll remember that my 10mm 1870s Imagination army hails from Gapsmark, which is a fictional, vaguely Germanic country. However, while the Gepetons in 10mm are in tan and green uniforms, once upon a time I was going to paint them all in bright blue, which as you can see here is the Talassar blue from the Games Workshop contrast paint range. As my history, as it were, of Gapsmark extends from an early medieval to 19th century period, kind of fantasy period, stretching from early medieval or Dark Age history right up until the 19th century, perhaps the early 20th century. I painted up various characters in 28mm in that early Gapsmark blue for role-playing games. So some of the people here might seem a bit incongruous to find them all in the same party, but I can assure you there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The first two are quite simple. They are a halfling ranger and a human fighter. Both of these are old metal Lord of the Rings strategy battle games minis of a hobbit archer and Faramir captain of Gondor, respectively. Third up is not a chap at all, but is actually a fair lady, an old plastic Sorsha model from Privateer Press's War Machine line. She's quite a formidable woman with her double-handed hammer there, and I imagine that she might well be petty nobility of some kind. Either way, she looks like she's more than capable of dealing some damage to some goblins or skeletons or whatever they might find in a dungeon crawl somewhere in deepest, darkest Gapsmark. Next up is a chaplain from Colonel Bill's Wargames depot, so I don't know the manufacturer. He's in darker colours because of his profession. It just made more sense to me that perhaps instead of being in bright blue, he should be in a navy blue with a black undershirt and white collar. Makes me wonder possibly if he's friends with this character. And then lastly, we have the only conversion here amongst the Gapsmark team. Now, this man is a little kitbash of a watch captain or Rittermeister of Gapsmark. So he's a simple conversion of a Dungeons & Dragons pre-painted miniature with legs from a Warlord Games Landsknecht. The sword, I'm not sure where that comes from. I believe it comes from the old Wargames Factory Malburian range, which is now owned by Warlord Games. As you can see, he looks to be quite the formidable chap, a little bit shorter than the others, but definitely very, very brave. And as Steve from On Point HQ would probably appreciate, he has a massive codpiece. We're just going to have to wait so we can get that codpiece action. There it is. Then third is some random assortments. So biggest first, we have a classic Citadel Miniatures Ogre in a fetching red hood. And as you can see, there's a helmet there by his feet. He's been mounted on a 50mm square slaughter base. And yeah, I was really proud with how this guy came out. I tried my best to try and make the skin tone slightly more yellowish, just to make him a bit more mottled in tone. So I used a wash of, I believe it's the Games Workshop Games Workshop wash Cassandora yellow over the base coat that I used, which I believe was Wraithbone, followed by a Seraphim Sepia wash, and then went over with Guilliman Flesh like the rest of the models. And it just came out with a slightly more mottled hue, which befits his inhuman stature. So that is a classic Citadel Miniatures Ogre in blue breeches and a fetching red hood. Look at him go. So next we have a classic Citadel Miniatures chap carrying bagpipes. He might come from the Empire range or the Bretonnian range from around the 3rd edition time period. Next we have a classic metal Lord of the Rings strategy battle games model of the Wosis chieftain Garn Buri Garn, painted as a wild tracker of some description. And then finally we have another model that I got at Colonel Bill's Wargames depot, evidently some kind of gentleman adventurer. Again, I don't know the manufacturer, but he looks like quite a jolly chap, doesn't he? And then next up we have some pre-paints. These aren't the fanciest models in the world, but they are just simply pre-painted ones that I based, and in a couple of instances I did touch up the colours with some washes, perhaps painted over some of the parts that weren't so well painted. And yeah, they are very, very simple. We have a Dwarf Gunner from the Mage Knight collectible miniatures game. Gosh, who remembers that? a pair of werewolves from an old Doctor Who miniatures game that I was actually very impressed both with the paint scheme and with the quality of the painting. And then finally, we have a couple of ghostly chaps from the Dungeons and Dragons collectible model range, which I believe is the Return to Ravnica or something like that. I don't follow Dungeons and Dragons settings very much. But yes, so we have 5 characters here, all pre-painted models, and I think that they've turned out quite nicely. And then last, but by no means least, we have cows. These are Highland cows. They're 3D printed ones. I have absolutely no idea where they came from. I picked them up at a stall at the Plymouth Association of Wargamers show this February. And they're not the most exciting models in the world. They took very well to a primer coat and some contrast paint. Not much needed to be done with them. But as you can see, there is one wearing a very snazzy hat with a big blue feather. And that is named, at the Lady Lollard's insistence, Daisy, the cow. So the Lady Lollard is my partner, and she is the one who decided that we must have cows, and one of them must wear a hat, and the one wearing a hat must be called Daisy. And by the way, just as a development, the Lady Lollard and I are now engaged. So if you've followed me on Twitter, you'll have seen that I put up that notification about a week ago. And so, yes, so things might slow down a little bit on the channel, even though I've only just got back, as we move towards getting married. So some wonderful news there, and I'm very, very grateful to her and her support for my crazy hobbies. So there you have it, folks. Those are the RPG models that I've been painting over the last couple of years. There's only a handful of them, I know, but in case you were worrying that I would have nothing else to play RPGs with, I'd just like to show you all the ones I'm working on. So as you can see, there's a right assortment of models at the back here. They come from all manner of different manufacturers. We have some Mage Knight ones. We have some Dungeons and Dragons pre-painted miniatures. We have, let me see, we have some classic Citadel miniatures. We have some Games Workshop Lord of the Rings strategy battle games miniatures. We have, oh goodness me, there are even a couple of Mantic Games models out there, a couple of Frostgrave models too. There really is a wide assortment of miniatures, and over the next few years, I imagine, I will be painting these up alongside various other projects. They are ones that might just require a bit of basing, and they will be good to go. Some of them might require a full paint. Some of them might just require a little touch-up of the details and an added wash and highlight. So that is everything that we've got here today, Dungeons and Dragons or Castles and Crusades role-playing games related. Obviously, I will be looking to primarily play games using Castles and Crusades, but one of the other things that I think a wide and varied collection such as this would be very helpful for is for a game like Rangers of Shadowdeep by J.J. McCullough. Or J.A. McCullough, should I say. This is a fantastic little game. I've only played a couple of games of it, but I'm really enjoying that. And yes, hopefully a collection like this would be fantastic for playing a solo game like Rangers of Shadowdeep, or a game of Castles and Crusades, a campaign of Castles and Crusades, either with friends or playing solo using a solo emulator like possibly the Mythic Games Master emulator. Now, very typically, I actually picked this up just before the second edition dropped. I had no idea that they were coming out with a second edition, but that is just my luck. So, Castles and Crusades using the Mythic Game Master emulator, or for games like Rangers of Shadowdeep. I'm really interested in perhaps exploring some role-playing games on the channel alongside wargames, and if that's something that you're interested in, then let me know. And if there's any models in particular out of that mass at the back that you'd be interested in seeing me paint, also let me know in the comments. So I suppose this is where I should do the thing that tells you to like, comment, and subscribe, hit the bell icon and all of that jazz. But yeah, this is just another video coming from me, some of the models that I've been painting over the last couple of years. So until the next video, God bless and cheers.